I think we'll be right to start now.
Okay then, thank you very much. Welcome to today's webinar, Small to Medium Enterprises and Government Partnering to Grow Australian Earth Observation Capabilities. Welcome to our three speakers and to the participants that have just joined us. I'm Megan Lewis, Acting President of Earth Observation Australia. This webinar is the third in a series between now and June this year, leading up to the Advancing Earth Observation Forum to be held in Brisbane, 22nd to the 25th of August. These webinars aim to engage you in some of the hot and current topics in Earth observation and to build connections in our EO community in advance of the forum, and to start conversations about topics that we hope will be more fully fleshed out during the forum. In opening the webinar, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of all of Australia, the country on which we live and work. And I offer my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And I aim to build our shared knowledge and experiences. And I also acknowledge the many members of the community who are being affected by floods and disasters across a lot of that land at present. I'd like to remind everybody of the Earth Observation Australia Code of Conduct for our event. You'll find that on our webpage. So just a reminder to please be professional, considerate and respectful to others, and open to discussing a diversity of ideas and perspectives. Some housekeeping things to note. This session's being recorded, and because of the number of participants, please keep your webcam off unless you're one of the presenters. And please post any comments and questions in the Zoom chat. We'll be keeping track of those, and our program has a question and answer session after our three presentations. So, SMEs and government partnering. All of the recent plans and roadmaps for future development of EO in Australia and our own Earth Observation Community Plan emphasise the opportunities for Australian companies and industries, as well as core roles for government. And out of all of those reports, there's universal agreement that SMEs will be important in the growth and development of Australian Earth observation into the future. So in this webinar, we're going to explore how Australia's Earth observation capabilities can be strengthened through the involvement of both government and SMEs. And we have three very experienced speakers from diverse sectors who will present their perspectives on SME government partnerships. Partnerships that not only meet the working and operational requirements of both parties, but which also support best practice deliverables. And we hope that this webinar will provide a platform to start a wider conversation about the practical aspects of realising the potential within our startup and SME community. So we have three speakers, and I'll introduce Brendan McAtee, who is our first speaker. Brendan is Industry Engagement Manager with Frontier SI. Welcome, Brendan. In this and previous roles, he's worked extensively in the innovation ecosystem, leading and managing innovation programs in organisations and facilitating industry research engagement, always with an eye on Earth observation and space sectors. Brendan's worked on the development of remote sensing applications for agriculture, emergency and natural resource management, within government industry, and including the startup sector. So I'll now hand over to you, Brendan, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Just making sure that comes up. Does that look okay? Does it look okay, Megan?
Looks great, Brendan.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction, Megan, and thank you for everybody who's online today to listen to this. And I'd also like to express my good wishes to and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation over where I am over near Fremantle in Western Australia. So thank you for the introduction, Megan. What we're talking about today, a bit of an extended title there, opportunities and constraints to SME government partnerships for EO activities. What I'm really going to talk through today, and my thing does its thing, hang on a second. Oh, sorry. There we go. All right. Thank you. Really, some high-level dot points acknowledging this is a fairly brief webinar, and we're going to have some Q&A at the end. So I wanted just to go through some of the key points that I've really seen as being working in this space that's bringing innovation together with the space sector and Earth observation. So I put, there's two ways that I'm looking at it at the moment. So G2B, which is government to business. How does government support business and SMEs? And then B2G, how do businesses support government and what do they need? So you can get a bit of a flavour for the points that we'll go through fairly quickly today. And as mentioned, you can put questions in the chat, and we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end of our set of speakers today. So this is what I think important when we're talking about how can government support Earth observation. This is an idea, an example of what the prize is. So the classic one from Landsat, when they made Landsat free and available to industry, government, everybody to use it. That's the scale of value that was created out of making that data free, right? So that's a government investment in Earth observation and making that free for everybody to use. So 3.45 billion US each year. So that's out of the US as well as international users. But that gives you an idea of what the prize is. You know, if we can get this kind of level of support for SMEs and industry right. And we're working well with Digital Earth Australia from Geoscience Australia's program that's working on the Australian version of that to make sentinel data and those kind of things free and really accessible and providing in a way that users want to use it. Here's what I think the key barrier is. We've, from the Frontier SI perspective, been doing a bit of work with Geoscience Australia and Digital Earth Australia market study and a project of Know the Market to Grow the Market with SmartSat. And when we look and review what that tells us in terms of, what are the barriers towards trying to get to that 3.5 billion a year, the barriers are still pretty clear. So lack of understanding about these technologies. So how do we really need to think about how do we provide information out there to the outside the Earth observation community about what these Earth observation technologies are and what they can do. So that's really important. And as I mentioned, we've been doing some work with Geoscience Australia around their Digital Earth Australia program. Digital Earth Australia market study has been looking at that idea. If we say we want to make this data free and accessible following that Landsat model, and we have satellites up in space, we want to acquire data, process data, make data ready for industry to use, then we've got to ask that question, who are industry? What are they trying to do? How do they use data? And what do they need from a program like Digital Earth Australia? That's what the market study was about. And the interesting thing to come out of that is different industries are different. If we want to get them using Earth observation data and creating that value that we're looking for, we've got to pitch it slightly differently for different industries. In agriculture, it's really about how do we make sure that this data is trusted? Earth observation needs to be trusted. In mining, it really needs to contribute to operational efficiency. So we need to talk in that language. In urban planning, it's really about evidence for decision making. So how do we make that data available and accessible so that it contributes to evidence? In finance and insurance, there's a couple of components there. It's about managing risk. It's about understanding customers. And together, those things are really key parts of return on investment. So we need to make it clear that Earth observation has a return on investment for the finance insurance sectors. And if we're talking about water in general, the idea of foresight. So that idea of where will there be rainfall in the future? Where is water going to be on the landscape and those kind of things? So this is the important part from the industry perspective is when we're talking Earth observation data and getting more people to use it, we need to understand their industry drivers and pitch it accordingly. So that's a little bit about barriers, but now starting to talk about models that work to unlock those opportunities. So we saw that one of the key barriers to uptake was really around that knowledge of what Earth observation is and what it can do. So it's part of the Digital Earth Australia program at Geoscience Australia. That DEA training for spatial analysts course, it's been running for a while. That's a really good course. Everybody I know who's attended that course to understand Digital Earth Australia, how to use it better, how to get value out of it, has has said really good things about that course. How do we scale that up for the rest of industry? So that's the first part. Second, so we want to get people thinking about data and using about data, and there's a number of challenge events, hackathons that happen around how do we use Earth observation data better. I've put Gravity Challenge there as one of those, which is a really important one, has a strong Earth observation aspect to it. So that's the first part. How do we engage people and get them thinking about problems they can solve? That real challenge focus, new ideas. How do we use this kind of data to solve problems? But the next part, that's often the fun part. Right? But if we want to get to creating value from Earth observation for industry, then the hard yards start. How do we develop those ideas into something that is a real business? So these kind of ideas of accelerators, and I've talked about the Moonshot Space Elevator series there as one example of those. That's another part we need in that, in that ecosystem, or that developing chain of development from idea to businesses to create that value. And then the next stage on, this is some other work that Frontier SI has been doing in a couple of ideas. The idea of lab-style programs, where there's a small amount of money put together by an organisation to work with. This has been really successful working with the Australian Geospatial Intelligence organisation. So putting out some challenges there, getting SMEs who have got some capability to solve those challenges, identifying how can we put those together. So really enabling and facilitating SMEs to work with larger organisations of government to solve those problems. And the learnings are two ways. So one is from the SME side, learning how to work with big organisations. What do they need? What capabilities does the SME need to be able to provide value for a big organisation? But the other side as well. So how does a big organisation like the AGO, how does that work with smart, with smart young SMEs and get value out of those, not just from the products and understand what's available in the market, but organisationally, how does it need to be structured and what kind of programs allow it to work easily with those SME sectors to extract that value? So those kind of lab style programs really facilitate that. A small amount of money, short projects that really start to demonstrate how an SME can work with a larger organisation. I think that's a real good model for starting to build that collaboration and unlock that value. So then I'll go from, that was all the government to business stuff. If I talk about business to government now, how do we support that developing business to business ecosystem for Earth observation services? And the key one from government perspective is become customers. So we start with some investment and challenges and those kind of things and some grants to get things up and going. But what SMEs really need to build and show that demonstrate their value proposition is customers. So wherever government can become a customer of an SME in the Earth observation space, that's what we need to happen. To enable that and facilitate it, there's work being done around how do we make that procurement easy from the government perspective so that the products and services that are being developed by these SMEs can be easily used by government. That's a key part. And the third part here is, I think, is something which is newer and a bit of the style of the time, these kind of market development for SMEs. So government supporting that. So government supporting the development of Earth observation markets, both within Australia and internationally, so that SMEs can provide their products and services, not just in Australia, but start to reach out to those international markets as well. I think that's an emerging key role that government can play. And I've mentioned a couple there that my role in Frontier SI are involved with. So Connect-EO project is really looking at Earth observation SMEs from Europe. How can they work in Australia and build Australian capability, but provide that two-way opportunity for Australian SMEs to work back into Europe as well. And similar with the UK Australia Space Bridge. It's been supported by SmartSat and Australian Space Agency. So that same thing, how can that capability that exists outside Australian space industry and the Earth observation industry in Australia, how can that come in to help build that capability, build the role of SMEs creating that value with Earth observation, but also take the ideas and technology that we develop from our Australian counterparts and Australian SMEs back out to the world. So I think that's a really emerging important piece as well as we seek to grow the space industry. So thank you. I know that was quite quick, very high level, always happy to talk more. I saw Larissa posted my LinkedIn in the chat, always happy to talk to people through there, or you can contact me through Frontier SI there. Looking forward to the questions that we have, and I will pass back to you, Megan.
Thanks very much, Brendan. A lot of insights there, and I think some really valuable models that clearly have been working. Also, a valuable point that you made is that different industries have different requirements. So it's never going to be one size fits all. It's always going to be necessary to work with that particular end user sector. So in addition to talking about government to business relationships, I appreciate that you've touched on business to business partnerships and the importance of those, and also connecting Australian businesses to international companies and how those connections can be made. So look, thank you very much for your presentation, Brendan, and I'm sure that stimulated some thoughts and questions from our audience. I'd encourage people to put their questions in the chat, and we'll put those to Brendan and possibly our other panelists at the end of the session. So now we'll move on to our second speaker, Dr. Naomi Mathers, who is the General Manager at Geospatial Intelligence Proprietary Limited, which is an Australian SME that was established in 2002. Naomi has been an active member of the Australian space industry for more than 20 years, working across industry, government, academia, and defence. She supported the establishment of the Advanced Instrumentation and Technology Centre and conducted reviews of Australian space industry capability for the federal and state governments. And before joining GI, Naomi was a director at the International Centre for Complex Project Management. I just love the name of that centre. So over to you, Naomi, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, very much, Megan. Well, yes, there's certainly an awful lot of complexity within the space industry. So it was a, let me. Can you see my screen okay?
That's good. Thanks, Naomi.
Lovely. Thank you so much for inviting us to contribute to this conversation. It's certainly a topic that is very dear to our heart, and I'm very pleased to be able to put to you today the perspective of an SME that has been part of the space industry for 20 years this year. So I do think that we bring a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience of working with government. We do serve both government and industry clients. And so we have, as Brendan was talking about, that different experience and watching the maturity of those users evolve over the years as well. So I think we are quite, for a long time, we were rare in Australia that we were a wholly Australian-owned company working in the space industry. But really we are a data company. Space-derived data just happens to be a core part of our offering. But really it's about gathering a wide range of information, and that's all geolocated. So it's very much about helping our customers understand what is happening in a particular location and helping them unlock the value of that. So we have a presence in Canberra and Brisbane, but we also now have an office in the UK. Brendan mentioned the Space Bridge. We've certainly had the experience of now establishing an office in the UK and working from the other side of that Space Bridge and being able to see it's quite interesting being able to compare the two different environments. But if I talk a little bit, so what I'd like to do is give you an introduction, I suppose, or to talk about our engagement with government through the types of services that we offer and understand how that offers value to government and industry users. So we actually support the entire life cycle of geospatial systems, right from looking at requirement studies to the distribution of imagery, the processing and analysis, the development of tools, and the provision of training. I think the provision of imagery is a really important capability for Australia. There's been a lot of conversation, well, a lot of excitement around the fact that Australia is now going to be building its own satellites. And certainly at the ARTC, we saw from a hole in the ground that facility to testing testing 4 satellites, which was a really exciting journey to go on. But I think it's understanding that this is a a broad ecosystem. So Australia generating its own satellite imagery is really important. Access to Sentinel and Landsat is very important, but also having access to very high resolution imagery is also important. Different applications call for different types of sensors and different resolutions, and sometimes it's all about the speed to be able to get access to that imagery. So I think this is an area where GI provides a very important service. So we have access to a large number of international commercial providers. We can access both optical and synthetic aperture radar imagery. We work with satellite AIS, satellite RF, and so we can access different resolutions and at different time scales, and we can also task these satellites ourselves. So if in the case of the most recent floods, if a government agency requires access to very high resolution imagery, we can access that. The fact that we can access high resolution SAR also means that we're not weather dependent. And then we can work with that agency either just to, if they've got the internal capability, to pass the imagery on, or we can help with the analysis as well. We combine that satellite imagery with aerial and open source intelligence as well. And so it's very much about the data fusion to understand what is happening. But certainly being able to provide, to get to task and access that imagery rapidly is key. So we can, as I said, we can task the collection directly. We can direct task Airbus, Black Sky and Capella, and then make requests for MaxSAR. So this is really important. There's a lot of applications where the immediacy of the data is critical. And so being able to give Australia access to that type of rapid information, governments, commercial users, defence is really, really important. Combined with that, I suppose, is then our expertise in artificial intelligence, machine learning, visualization. It's all very well to have access to this imagery, but there's a lot of data to process. And so the ability to rapidly access and download that information, to be able to run algorithms on to extract the information. So the more we can automate, then the more we're talking about extracting the information. It's not so much about the data itself, it's about what can we help the customer understand from that imagery. And so the whole infrastructure around that, the data management, the security, all of this is part of that modern environment of managing, I suppose it's modern infrastructure. And so whether it is the government data sources or whether it's commercial data, the maturing of this sector is also very much about what is the modern infrastructure that needs to support that. And so this is an area where we have expertise in that, but also working with government to help them understand what is possible in this area and making sure that Australia is well positioned. We certainly do hold that this is a critical infrastructure for Australia. This is something that needs to be managed in order to have the assured access and the confidence in the data. We also have provided these services into many, many sectors. So everything from environmental to mining to defence. There's a maturing in this sector. More and more customers some of them are building their own internal capability, or some of them are partnering with companies like ours to be able to provide that capability for them. But they are understanding the value of it. They understand the commercial value, or they're understanding the importance it can play in managing their risk. And so I think there really is a maturing of this sector to understand the value it offers both government in sort of regulatory environment, but also industry. The delivery systems are also changing. We are definitely seeing that a lot more of these services are being provided in tablet form, really. We all want this information on a device. So we're seeing a lot more platforms and interactive systems. So we're seeing that visualization of the data, the integration of the data and the way it's delivered change. I mentioned briefly, if you're not familiar with it, satellite AIS, satellite automatic identification system. So we can actually track a ship anywhere in the world and tell you where it was within the last minute. So we are moving towards, what you would a near real-time monitoring system. So we're talking about customs, maritime surveillance and border protection, security. Biosecurity is a big topic. An important topic. You want to understand where ships originate, where they've been, making sure that we are protecting Australia's assets. And when we think about the value of industries like the pork industry or beef or any livestock or even some of the grains, that the biosecurity threat is very real and would have a devastating effect on these sectors. So monitoring Australia's, we're a very large island with a very large maritime environment. So understanding what's going on is very important. I thought I'd quickly flick through a couple of sort of examples of things we've done. We're looking at maritime surveillance. That can be everything from illegal shipping to, we figured if we could identify a animal, a dugong in a marine environment, then it's a lot easier to identify ships. So this was a demonstration of being able to capture the imagery and process it using AI and being able to automatically detect dugongs off the west coast of Australia. The environment, there's a lot of use cases for agriculture, for greenhouse gas abatement projects, so greenhouse monitoring, and so that's both in a regulatory and a commercial sense. There's a huge value to using Earth observation data, but in an operational context. If we're looking at monitoring infrastructure, so whether that be in a mining context or urban planning, there's a lot that can be automated. So we're actually improving our efficiency. We're looking at being able to integrate all of this information with our urban planning, so that the digital twins type activity and being able to support that efficient decision-making and planning. So these are all supplementary to a lot of government agencies' core practices. I wanted to touch on training because this is the capacity building piece. So making sure that government agencies are able to use and understand the information that they're being given, to build capability in this area in government but and in industry as well. And so we do offer training to make that possible.
1 minute, thanks, Naomi.
Yep, thank you. Just about there. So I've already touched on some of the different sectors that we do already support. And I wanted to leave the rich sort of information for the context for the discussion. So that's a little bit about what we offer now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for that presentation. Certainly appreciate the fact that you've been able to draw on 20 years of deep and broad experience in geospatial intelligence to provide some examples of how your business has worked with government in a whole range of applications. A point that you made there, I think, picks up something that Brendan raised. You talked about the diversity of sectors that you've worked with, and you've talked about how over the time of working with them, it's been a learning experience and maturity is developing in terms of end user understanding of what, let's say, EO can do, what the capabilities are, and then also maturity in terms of models of engagement. So certainly a lot of learnings there. And some of the case studies and examples of data that you presented are certainly very relevant at present. The very high resolution satellite imagery, Maxar imagery for monitoring disasters, we're seeing that in the news every day. So very relevant examples. Thank you for the presentation. And again, I'd encourage our audience to put questions in the chat and we'll pick those up for further discussion with Naomi at the end of the session. So now we'll move on to our third speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Kieran Vidal, who is an Army Geospatial Officer with over 20 years of experience working in, let's get my notes back, working in commanding multinational geospatial teams as Chief Geospatial Officer in Afghanistan and a Senior Geospatial Analyst for the United Nations mission in South Sudan. Most recently, he's been involved in coordinating geospatial support for a range of natural disasters. Kieran's also had several capability development roles within Defence, including leading development of the Army's future geospatial support system. So thank you, Kieran, for joining us, and over to you for your presentation.
Megan, hopefully you can all see my slides and hear me loud and clear.
Yeah, that's good.
What I'm going
Thanks.
to do, beautiful, thank you. So what I'm going to do, firstly, I've got to thank both Brendan and Naomi for their couple of the points that they've raised during their presentations, because it dovetails very nicely with a few words I already put on slides, so it was done in advance, I promise. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to cover a little bit about the context of defence and how we use Earth observation to support our particular requirements. I'll look at some of the concepts, the challenges with data, and then where the benefits really start to come in on our engagement and the need to engage more with industry and SMEs. What we can benefit out of that from ourselves, and then look at a couple of random emerging requirements if time permits. I think probably a key piece that I'd like to highlight up front is that there are obviously different requirements for different industries, and that was something that Brendan mentioned. Defence, if you really want to look at it in a different light, is a conglomerate of a whole range of different industries. We have people who are worried about terrain and land categorisation usage. We have people who are worried about maritime requirements and air requirements. We have all the different uses that we want to do in and around those different, what we call domains, but also leading into the different types of questions and analysis we want to do on that. So we really come from a very broad church, I think, of different ways we can use and apply EO and to be able to help with our problem set. And that obviously opens up a lot of opportunities with industry as well. From my own background, I've had benefits being both a user, a producer, and also a beneficiary out of Earth observation for all the different roles that I've done over the time. And I think that's probably a really good start point for me to get into the key points I want to cover about the defence requirements. Really use a lot of Earth observation to help our situational understanding and our monitoring of the environment around us. We use it to create foundation data where that's not available. That could be standard mapping. It could be image maps and other things, or creation of vector data. We will often create operational data specifically built from Earth observation. Now, that Earth observation could be anything from a small drone through to satellite imagery and a range of other assets in between. What we're really trying to do is be able to assess the operating environment to help us know where our opportunities are and where the environment or the adversary might have an impact upon that. So we really want to understand how terrain might affect our manoeuvre. Now that could be maritime terrain or obviously on land. And also we start to look into things like critical infrastructure and potential impacts and damage to that. We're using it to monitor and understand what might be happening around us so that we can potentially get an upper hand. Remotely sensed data particularly enables us to get into areas we can't normally get into. It helps us to look at, for example, Afghanistan. With the evacuation operations around Kabul airport, we were able to get commercial imagery over that to help inform the decisions that we needed to make to support that evacuation. Same, understanding the environment up in northern New South Wales with the flooding around Lismore, or potentially volcanoes in Tonga. It gives us a quick and easy way to be able to start to understand what's going on so we can apportion our assets appropriately. we have a need, because of the type of, I guess, responsibilities we do, to be able to collect data anytime in any conditions. So that means we have to trade off in terms of the types of sensors we can use. So we are obviously interested in active and passive remote sensing techniques, so that we can, if it's cloudy, see what's happening on the ground. If it's nighttime, see what's happening around an area. The end state we're trying to get to is really help us make better decisions. We use the term decision-making superiority, which is about making better decisions faster and quicker than our adversaries. But really, it's just helping, like any other industry, when they're using geospatial or Earth observation, is how do I get the best bang for my buck with what I'm trying to do? So for that, context and clarity is very important for us. We need to really understand what's going on, what's changed, and what it might be. And that's really important for our commanders, because they are getting flooded with a lot of information, both from us and from the other systems and assets we have. And so being able to help give them the right information that adds value, reduces ambiguity is key. And timeliness and relevance of that information is important. There is a lot of, with the more sensors coming out there, there is more white noise and other distractions. We really need to help get to what is important quickly. An example of just some of the kinds of stuff we can do. We're in the process of acquiring a Boxer combat reconnaissance vehicle, and types of analysis that we can do will help us understand where that vehicle may or may not be able to go based on its characteristics. Because of its weight, because of its wheelbase, it can go over certain terrain and it will struggle in other terrain. So we can use Earth observation to help us understand where it could go, and to be able to inform, where we might potentially want to put our assets on the ground. Conversely, we understand where other people might be able to use their assets, so we can plan against that. Or geospatial intelligence is something that supports across the full spectrum of defence operations. Whether it be humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, which I've indicated before in the floods in New South Wales, and you can see an example of the imagery there, but also joint warfare as well, whether that be us or monitoring what's happening in joint warfare. And the image on the right is a recent image from the crisis in Ukraine. We're also requiring to do geospatial support to all phases of the response. So whether it be in the planning phase, which is particularly critical for us to make sure we've got our data enabled early, but also through the phases as the situation evolves and changes, and we transition to a lower intensity or reorganise and return to base. The other important thing that often gets overlooked, because we worry about the things you visually see with defence going out and moving around and doing stuff, is estate and infrastructure management. We have a very significant portion of Australia that we use for training, and we need to understand how we are using that environment, how we are looking after it. We are under the same environmental rules and considerations as anyone else. So we need to be able to monitor that, and also do our own infrastructure requirements for facilities being built. I guess the strategic guidance that we have that helps really reinforce where defence is going in terms of use of Earth observation tools is was captured in the Defence White Paper 2016, has been updated since then, but I particularly chose these words because I think it gets to the heart of where we're trying to go and what's happened in the last few years, and as we're moving ahead. Part of that is maintaining a technological edge. We're a small defence. We have some big neighbours. One of our unique, or one of our strengths can come from the ability to use technology better. A lot of the military modernisation challenges our ability to have more superior equipment here in Australia, which then means we need to think a bit more strategically about how we want to use our equipment, what equipment and capabilities we are buying. To provide the comprehensive situational awareness, the government has invested in a lot of different projects to be able to build our intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities. Imagery and targeting capabilities being enhanced. The analytic aspect to support that is key. We're also, the challenge which sort of alludes to what I was talking to before with supporting decision-making is integrating that information. How are we enabling and integrating what is collected by a multitude of assets to come together into a consolidated picture? That information management and the process around that will give us the situational awareness we need and help provide that information superiority we require. Now, I've just listed a couple of the projects down there which are indicative of where we're going, and the obligatory cool photos on the right-hand side where you can see everything from very small UASs, that's a Black Hornet, through to potentially some of the newer medium level UASs that we are looking at buying within the Australian Army, and obviously then there are a range of other assets as you go from there. I guess just quickly I'd say there is a new world order when it comes to GeoInt. Everybody is doing GeoInt. They don't realise they're doing it, I think, but in reality, how ubiquitous geospatial capabilities has become, the ability for people to look on things like Google Maps or any of the other systems and platforms that are out there, they're able to use Earth observation in their daily lives. I have a challenge of trying to translate the people's use of it in their daily life to what it would mean to how they would apply military capabilities and effects. Unfortunately, well, people are very much exposed to it. They don't necessarily understand the technical requirements that make it work. And that then starts to lead to a range of problems with integrating the data. Because if I've got 5 different sources of information in 5 different formats, how do I quickly get that into a consolidated picture? One of the things we need to do is layer our options to collect data. We might not always be able to collect it the way we want. And if I really need information, how do I get it? I might be getting that early, I might be getting that just in time, and I might need to use any of the range of platforms and sensors available to us to inform that, and then to be able to process and create data or conduct analysis as required. To do that, we need to be interoperable and integrated. All of the systems and platforms that we're buying are needing to be able to share that information, and the quicker and better we can do that, the better decision superiority we gain. We also need to be able to do that with our partners and our allies. And partners, I'm not just talking foreign militaries, I'm talking industry, I'm talking government, I'm talking all levels of where we are working and engaging with. And I think the key piece behind that is data format standards and the legalities of being able to share some information. We also need to be able to support at the point of need. If we're doing a lot of the support from a reach back scenario, how do I get that information forward? And I'll cover a couple of the challenges, particularly around that in a short bit. But enabling users to do their own geospatial analysis is something that is emerging more and more. How can people do basic analysis, or how are they able to start doing some very basic image science? They don't know the technical details behind it, so we've got to make sure that what is being provided to them is intuitive in a way that they can actually make informed decisions and they don't make an ill-advised decision. And we can use it to support mission planning, conducting virtual reconnaissance of an area that we might not be able to get to, but we can help people through virtual reality or augmented reality start to understand the environment they're about to step into.
1 minute, thanks, Kieran.
No worries. It's taken a while. Sorry. The other thing is capture once and use many. We want to be able to share our data quickly and use it effectively and efficiently. All right. I'm going to jump very quickly through this. Integrating data, I've covered a lot of that. More sensors mean more data, and that's more challenge to use. In some of the environments we're working at, we have very limited bandwidth to be able to share large formats of data. So how do we get smart about doing that, reducing the time from detection to analysis to create a reaction? And one of the things we're doing that is developing an Army digital twin concept. The benefits to defence from an industry supporting EO is our ability to develop capabilities that meet Australia's requirements. We're not necessarily relying on somebody else to build it for us who might have their own interests. This is about us being able to get exactly what we need to answer our questions. The expertise and capacities that we can draw on, as well as being able to keep up with change. There is so much change in our environment. How do we keep up with that change and the technical developments? How does Defence engage with SMEs and industry? We have a number of different avenues to do that. The Defence Innovation Hub is one of the more prominent ones, the Defence, where they're reaching out with innovation notices or conducting events where people can pitch ideas and provide industry response to a defence posed problem. Frontier and AGO Analytic Labs, that was covered by by Brendan before. Very good opportunity to be able to answer unique niche questions that we might have. Through our projects, we're engaging directly with market, with industry days, requests for tenders, attendance at trade shows or participation at trade shows, as well as other groups such as Defence Material Technology Centre, who help bridge the gap between academic research and industry. And there's also a geospatial support panel. I'll leave it on this one so people can read that just while I wrap up. But I'd just like to, I guess, reinforce the fact that EO is a critical requirement for defence for many, many different areas. Quite often we don't realise what we need or where we can benefit from the use of EO to support us. So often our ability to engage when we can improve that and be more active in that is really drawing out good opportunities for us to be able to make decision superiority. And with that, I'll conclude my brief.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Kieran. That was terrific. And I appreciated some of the information that you presented at the end there of how SMEs can and do engage with defence in terms of requirements. What I found interesting earlier in your presentation, while our first two speakers have talked about different end users, environment, agriculture, disaster, climate or whatever, you've presented a framework that really cuts across that and talked about the commonalities, probably in most of those areas, where Earth observation and geospatial data can add, providing foundational data, going places that you can't go otherwise, or seeing places that you can't go otherwise, and then monitoring change over time. So those things probably are common to a lot of these other applications as well, but I appreciated you seeing the commonality in those different sorts of applications. And also your point towards the end that everybody is now doing geospatial intelligence in one way or another, or they're tapping into that kind of data, even if they're not technical experts and even if they don't know it. Yes, they're users of Google Earth. And the fact that you're thinking about ways of, I guess, empowering people to take advantage of all of the information that's in that source of data. So to give them easy to use tools or pathways to be able to access the data, that you don't have to be an absolute domain specialist before you can get information out of the imagery. So there were a couple of very interesting points I heard there. Thank you. So for the last 10 minutes of our webinar, we'd like to open this up to a question and answer session. Again, we encourage you to post questions in the chat window. I think our panelists can see those, or I'll highlight them as they come up. But perhaps to start this discussion, and while our audience is reflecting on things, we've had some terrific examples and case studies here of government and SME and industry relationships. But a point that is sometimes brought up in this space is that government and industry are sometimes doing similar things. They're working in the same space, and perhaps there's a degree, or it might be seen that there's a degree of competition sometimes in certain capabilities. So I'd appreciate thoughts from each of our panelists on is that a jaundiced assessment? And perhaps how can we manage that sort of situation for productive relationships and optimal outcomes? So I don't know who'd like to respond. Just a quick response from each of our panelists.
I can give a quick
Brendan,
response.
thank you. Yeah.
I think, look, I think it's a topic that often of often discussion. I think when I think about it, it's really about understanding, where state of the art is. And I think there's a couple of points in that. One, state of the art, and then that education piece is a clear role for government to build that awareness across all the industries that we've talked to. I think that's really important. Then I think it's about supporting that emerging B2B, let's talk about business to business ecosystem, and acknowledging what services and products are already there, getting them to work better together and bringing together to solve those kind of problems. And I think that needs to be balanced against, the emerging, or working with the research sector, so that we make sure we understand state of the art, and that the research that we do, further expands what SMEs and are able to do through those business to business relationships. That's my short 2 cents for it.
Yep. Thanks, Brendan. And Naomi, I'm sure you have a view on this.
From a company perspective. So I suppose what I would like to contribute is the space industry, or the space and spatial industries, are an emerging industry. And so quite naturally, government has had a greater role to play. And I think the challenge is in that transition. So as the sector matures, then you're wanting to create, rather than government driving the activity and delivering the activity, it's about government providing the policy environment and government providing the setting where business can thrive. If you think about the aviation sector, initially government was flying the aircraft. Now it's purely commercial, and government provides the regulatory environment. Because of the nature of the Earth observation, the use of Earth observation for disaster response and national security and others, there's always going to be involvement from government. But I suppose where we're talking about having a thriving industry is when government becomes a very sophisticated and mature customer. And so we need to have an environment where business has a viable business model. Business can deliver these services. Business has customers so that they stay in business and can grow. And then you've got an environment where they're the ones who are innovating in a way that they're delivering operational services. And I think that's the one thing that government is poor at, delivering operational programs. So if government can stimulate the innovation, support the infrastructure, provide that core customer role, then industry has an environment where it can thrive. There's some certainty around policy and certainty around being able to make a business out of it.
Thanks very much, Naomi. Certainly some, food for thought there, I think, and that will stimulate some more discussions, I think. Kieran, interested to hear your perspective on this.
Can I just get you to quickly repeat just part of the question?
Well,
my hearing
there's a perception, certainly in the geospatial areas of remote sensing, digital twins even, there's a perception, or perhaps a reality, that both government and industry are working in the same space, and there's overlapping capabilities, and that sometimes that is perceived as competition. Is that just a perception, or how do we manage this for productive relationships and optimal outcomes?
Yeah, I can see where the perception does come about competition. I think certainly from my experiences, the competition, it shouldn't be seen that way. It is more about how does government and the industry be able to have the ideas and the technical expertise come together. From my perspective, I look at we have a range of different requirements, but quite often we need the expertise to be able to come through it. So we might start with an idea, but then need to have that reinforced and enabled through industry and other partners. So it could initially be perceived as a competition, but I think if we actually look at it over the longer term, it really transitioned from a competition of ideas through to a collaboration of outcomes.
Thanks very much for your perspective on that, Kieran. I'm looking in the chat and I'm seeing a question here from Tayaba to Naomi. The breadth of applications and sectors that GI has and does work with was pretty impressive and probably daunting. And the question there is, do you really need to start with that breadth, or how did your company start? Did it grow that big? Or is it possible to perhaps, I'll add on my bit, build a business focusing on a smaller range of sectors?
So this is an example of 20 years of growth. So and I think it really it's if you're talking about a business, then you're thinking very slightly differently. So where do you have a competitive advantage? And so often it starts with, where do you have domain expertise? Where do you understand? You have to understand your customer, because if nobody's going to buy your services, then you do not have a viable business. We started with defence. We understood defence. We understood defence's needs, and we had services and products that defence needed. How that had been evolved is we saw that there were other government agencies and industries that could benefit from similar expertise, and that's where a lot of that activity then grew from. What I think is happening at the moment is that, so for example, if you think of agriculture, we do hear that some of the farmers or some of the agricultural associations, there's so many small companies coming at them with new ideas, it can become quite fractured. And so I do think, again, some of that maturing of the system is, do you have something different that will give your customer an advantage? Can you integrate within how they serve their existing systems, how they want to access your services? And maybe will you partner with somebody else rather than starting up a new company? So that I think as the ecosystem matures, we'll start seeing, rather than a whole lot of startups, we'll see some mature companies, some clusters of people offering rounded services rather than just individual offerings. But sometimes you start with a technique that's will service a range of industries, or sometimes it's a particular process for one industry.
No, thanks very much for that insight, Naomi. We have another question here from Hannah, and I'll put it to anybody on the panel. Through all of your presentations, we can see that there's a wealth of data out there. How do we ensure that the right or the most appropriate quality and type of data is getting to users, given how easy it is to access that? I know a couple of speakers have talked about choosing the right data and choosing the right tools for the particular application. So I guess it's making choices in that wealth of data. Who'd like to comment on that?
I can give a quick comment on that. Thanks, Megan. Look, I think it's a really important question. Traditionally, if we look at the big Earth observation systems that have come out of NASA and European Union, so Sentinel and those kind of things, they all have strong calibration and validation programs. So calibration, making sure we're measuring what we think we're measuring, validation, making sure the products are right at the end. So I think what we need to make sure is that the new generation of smaller companies have access to that infrastructure and that calibration and validation infrastructure to go through that similar kind of process. And there's a couple of projects which are going on through Geoscience Australia and SmartSat CRC, which are looking at what's the best way to address exactly that question for the emerging Australian space industry. So I'd say it's a very important one. Working out the best way to do it is important, and we're starting to think about it.
Thanks very much, Brendan. I think, Kieran, it was possibly you that talked about choosing tools and data that are appropriate, often in a quite constrained sort of environment. Do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I certainly do. Yes, the volume of data creates a big problem for us, because quite often we're using our data on multiple networks at once, not just because of classification, but because we're also going into a deployed environment where we do have those limited bandwidths. So we need to be smart about what data we move, where we do the interfaces, and where we do the processing as well. Can we do some processing at the sensor where I've reduced the amount of data I need to push forward to answer the questions that are being asked or might be required? So being really astute, I think, with what we now need to move is going to be a key, and also what you prepare in advance. So we will try and preload a lot of our data before we go, but then update in a smart context as we need to, because this environment will change and we need that new information. So it really comes into a balance of being smart and astute and being prepared to adjust it.
Thanks very much, Kieran. I'm mindful of the time, and there's certainly plenty more that we can discuss in this space, but I think we'll try to carry that conversation forward into future occasions and our face-to-face forum in August. So I'd like to thank everybody who's participated today. A particular thank you to our expert and experienced panelists, Brendan McAtee, Naomi Mathers and Kieran Vidal, for your different and very insightful perspectives on our topic. I'd also like to thank the directors of the Advancing Earth Observation Australia Forum for the concept and the initiation of these webinars, Larissa Marfan, our partnerships coordinator, and Sylvia Michael, our secretary for logistics and organisation. And Larissa has posted a link. We'd really like some feedback from people that have participated on how you found the webinar. Thank you very much for joining. And we hope that this webinar will provide a platform to start a broader conversation that we can carry forward in the forum. So we look forward to seeing you in our future webinars. Please keep an eye on our webpage and your inbox for news about them. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.